A2P SMS commercialization, which is, as I said, the here and now. There's still huge amounts of revenue and profitability to be made through the CPaaS and M&O environments in SMS still today. So if I could maybe start with Stuart, start with you first. So what evidence are you seeing on the fraud? Let's just talk about the fraud side through A2P SMS today.
Okay, so a bit of background. We're a firewall vendor, part of Enea. We have messaging firewalls for both MNOs and CPaaS. So traditionally, the use cases for these have been to defend against smishing and also to detect grey routes coming into MNOs. But now we've found over the last couple of years a bigger concern is the growing concern about AIT, which is a broad term, but generally speaking is artificially generated traffic that's generated in someone else's financial interest. The evidence we see, so it can't be seen as a binary decision on a per message basis as before. What we're looking for is indicators. So we're seeing anomalous behavior in both MNOs and CPaaS, where suddenly there's a lot of traffic going to certain countries for no explainable reason. We might see repeated messages that can't be justified by retries. And we mentioned that there's suspicions about commercial models driving this. So I think Mobile Squared said last year, 2023, 41% of MNOs had exclusive delivery deals. These are driving up the price because they're bidding for prepayments, and therefore there's an incentive to make sure that there's a certain volume of traffic. Only the volume can change or the price can change, and if the price can't change, there's an incentive to get the volume up. So these are the suspicions, and we're seeing some indicators that this may be the case.
Okay. Is there anything anybody else has seen? Anything you'd like to add to that? We talked a bit about smishing and artificially inflated traffic. Any?
Yes. So I think this is a phenomenon that I at least started witnessing more and more. So my background is a bit more towards the enterprises. So as a CPaaS player, so we saw this trend sort of emerging more during the pandemic period. And I actually have one very interesting case from Iceland. So we had a healthcare customer in Iceland, and one of our salespeople, the technical people, they started seeing a surge towards a country in Africa and then towards Afghanistan. And so we repetitively informed the customer that we are seeing this trend where there are massive volumes of SMS messages going to these destinations. And since they weren't in that space, they didn't realize that one of their services was being compromised to initiate these massive amount of messages. So the first response that we received was actually that we have an influx of immigrants into Iceland, so that might be causing it. But the population of Iceland is 350,000, and looking at the sheer number of the messages, it was in millions. And the realization came later. So I think one of the learnings that we have had as a CPaaS provider is that there was a lack of awareness, and the levels on which this happened is normally three. One is where the customer's own service or application gets compromised, and sort of the attack initiates from that. The second is where one of the CSP's accounts might be compromised or hacked, or people create fake accounts. And the third is where it might actually be injected into the networks through some other party. So out of those three categories, I've mostly come across the ones where the applications of our customers have been the targets.
Okay. Jason?
Yeah, I'd agree with that, actually. I think most of the time, it is those businesses they're not specialists enterprises in messaging. They don't understand it, and it is our job to educate them and help them through this process. Most of the time when I'm going to say not all the time, but majority of the time, probably 90% of the time, you approach these businesses and say, we've observed this behaviour, they're somewhat surprised, and depending on the level of the attacks, actually, sometimes it means they've got to make changes very quickly to their systems to help themselves. And that can be a bit of a shock. But what it does, actually, I don't know how you find it, we find the businesses are able to make those changes quite quickly when they realise the impact, rather than a 6 month, say, product cycle. They can make the changes within a week, and they're released, and they're updated, and they're operational as business as usual again, very quickly. And sorry, last thing, I think other types of fraud affect different industries, like on smishing, postal fraud is affecting like delivery companies or retailers, or banks are being affected, through different types of fraud. But AIT, it affects every business. There isn't anyone who's left out. There isn't an industry that's left out. Underlying, and I'm sure you may see this yourselves as well, we see every single industry and lots of different customers being affected, and we treat it as our responsibility to try and block that traffic as much as possible.
So I'm just going to play the layman a bit here. So there's two types of fraud I think we're talking about. One is the smishing, which, again, just to dumb it down to its lowest level, it's fraudsters out there trying to get information from the consumer, whether it's bank details, postal addresses, whatever it might be. And then the other type of fraud is within the industry, which is the AIT, the artificially enhanced traffic, where people within our industry, I'm sure it's nobody in this room, but people in the industry are sending more messages, multiple messages than they should be, to increase the revenues. And is that a fair summary? Have we missed anything? Is there anything else out there that doesn't kind of cover those two areas of fraud?
I think you're right. I think Stuart's comments really around AIT is a way of inflating traffic to help subsidise rates, because the message is actually not delivered in a lot of cases. They're never terminated, and so if they're not terminated, there's no cost. But from a perspective of the business, they can still charge their customer for that traffic, even though there's no termination cost. So allowing them to reduce the overall rate, isn't it?
Yeah, so I would agree. Those are the two categories, really, and a major difference being that smishing is an attack on the recipients, whereas AIT, in its many forms, there's various types of attacks, but they all aim to do much the same thing. They are an attack on the senders, or that the cost is on the senders. So while both reduce confidence in SMS as a delivery platform for commercial messaging, it's different people who are losing the confidence in each case. So I don't know, in my experience at least, I get forwarded a message maybe once a week now saying, is this genuine, from friends and family? Our experience in Enea is interesting that we took an early interest in AIT thanks to some of our customers who took an early interest in it. But it was difficult then to gauge at first the interest in, for example, operators. It could be said, well, they're not losing anything. In fact, they're gaining something. There's revenue here in it for them. We want to help them see the big picture, which I think companies like Vonage do, that this short-term revenue you're gaining is going to ultimately cost you your A2P SMS revenue.
I mean, I can certainly guess the answer to this, but Jason, what from your perspective, how does this affect things commercially, either from an operator CPaaS perspective or from an enterprise perspective?
I think there's a couple of areas really. I think the first one is that price. If the price goes up, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that businesses are going to look elsewhere. They're going to look at other channels. They're going to look at other options. Why shouldn't I send a one-time passcode via email? Costs me nothing. It works rather than via SMS. We know it's not the same experience, but you can see a business perspective of it. I think it was Pedro earlier was saying around, and we've observed the same, that when operators are increasing their rates so regularly, with this level of frequency, it has a massive impact on those enterprises, and they can't justify that incremental cost. So there is that side of it. I think at the same time, you've got some countries, India, Mexico, you can keep going on the list, that have the domestic versus international rates, which is pushing out some of those international businesses in terms of wanting to do international business, because the cost is so extortionately high. This isn't a small variance, we can be talking 10 times or more a factor of the price, so it's really significant. From a local perspective, in terms of different operators in different countries though, they are starting to apply rules and constraints that help their customers, which is brilliant, In the UK, sorry, for those of you who don't know, I also sit on the MEF board as well. And so the work that I've done there was around delivering the UK sender ID registry. And that's made a massive impact on the UK and really helped reduce fraud in that territory. And that's also been delivered into Ireland. Not the same impact because it delivered later on in the process, and in Spain as well. But it has had a positive impact on consumers in those countries. And I think what's really important is those kind of deliverables, they apply to all citizens and all operations within that country. Operators are trying to do the right thing. Sorry, I'm looking around the room because I know there are a lot of operators in the room here as well today, where there's lots of constraints going in to help their own customers, which is brilliant work. But from a CPaaS perspective, in terms of us delivering to our customers, if every operator in every country has a different set of rules, that makes our job very hard. So what we've got is this price going up, disparity between domestic and international, and this complexity of rules all occurring at the same time as new channels that are coming in, like WhatsApp. So you can see how those other channels would be more appealing to enterprises.
Yeah. Is this something that's getting worse? Is it the same? Have we just spotted it? What's the status right now?
I think it's just an escalation where, like the rules-based activities the operators are implementing, is to protect their consumers. So last year we delivered some work with BT and Cinch, and that work we did in the UK was awesome. We found a way of delivering incremental rules, and it became the gold standard. It also declares information to I'm going to say it's not quite public, but to an audience that declares smishing per million carried by each of those tier 1 aggregators, yellow cards, red cards. It displays that information to an audience of all of those within the ecosystem that are partners of BT or tier 2, tier 3s, but also the UK government, who can see who's good players and bad players within that industry. And that kind of knowledge and insight is great, and I'm treating that as a bit of a gold standard, and that's why the work that we've been involved with over the last couple of months with people like the Home Office and that side of things, we're trying to use that as the standard for the UK so we can get to one set of rules. And that, for me, that would be great. I think that's the compromise, rather than having thousands of different rules around the world.
And I think what this is all about is commercial, but there's probably a broader impact. I don't know, Gabriel, beyond the commercials, is there any other implications?
Yes, of course, and I think Mariola put it quite well earlier today, that trust, the trust of A2P messaging as a means of communication. If there are too much fraud in A2P messaging, the enterprises and customers will not want to use it. It's been quite a lot in the Swedish media the latest year. There's been 2 TV shows focusing on smishing, basically. It's called Uppdrag Granskning. It's an investigative journalist TV show highlighting this problem. And you could follow the fraudsters when they are doing the actual send-outs, and then how they follow up with end consumers, basically tricking them to wire money to their accounts. And then you can see the effect on the end consumers, and they are devastated. They don't dare to open any text messages anymore. They totally lose confidence in the means of communications.
It really hits home the thought of one of our loved ones, elder family members or something getting spoofed in this way. And we hear it time and time again in the UK, other countries where people have lost their savings or lost huge chunks of money to these fraudsters. And so it seems to be, the noise seems to be increasing slightly. Whether the media coverage has honed in on it recently in Sweden and other places, but certainly I think we're hearing more and more of this right now. Yeah. And I think it's coming into other channels too, like Jason mentioned.
I think it's also another important aspect of it, at least from a CPaaS perspective, is that it creates or has created a lot of friction between the CPaaS vendors and the enterprise customers. Because in the whole chain of the messaging, who is to be held responsible? Once the enterprise customer receives a large bill that is not really for the traffic that they initially intended to send, who is to be held accountable and who is responsible for those things? And this has become sort of a discussion internally at Vonage, and then sort of we've had to find ways of keeping the customers happy while also addressing the issue at hand. But to answer your question that you asked, I think, at least from my experience in the past 3 years, I've seen that there was a surge, and now those customers that were impacted, both the technology providers and the enterprises, they have now come to a level where it is relatively controlled because the awareness is there. Before, there was a lack of awareness, and it really came as a shock. So,
yeah. Stuart, can we maybe just dig a bit deeper into what you said right at the start in terms of the technical side and the regulatory side? What are technical tools or regulation doing to try and mitigate this?
So for AIT, probably only an industry initiative is going to be able to address this in time, because regulators are country specific, and moving at regulatory speed would not be quick enough to address this. There is the I3 forum. I don't know if the process they introduced about backtracking, trace-backing, if it does work or if there's any good experiences with it, but that is one initiative by the industry. Obviously, technical tools from vendors such as ourselves that identify the indicators of this and therefore identify the senders. It's something that's very hard. It's not a traditional firewall use case. It's more akin maybe to an intrusion detection system where you're looking for the key indicators of unexpected behavior in the network, and then you identify where it's coming from. So I think certainly cooperation across MNOs, CPaaS, and vendors, but also an investigate or a consideration of would more transparent pricing help, would take away some of the incentives or motivations for the bad actors to actually launch these AIT attacks.
I could add a little bit to that around the traceback. Last week, there was a CFCA event, Communications Fraud Association, and there were a few organisations there, Sonos, so owner of XConnect, parent company of XConnect, and many others, and talking about stir shaken in the US and the traceback method for calls. And they've been working on that, as you say, for a little while now. And in the US, actually, it's working really well. When I say really well, sorry, the traceback to go through all the different providers, they've gone from a process that used to take 6 months to do a traceback to a couple of weeks to do a traceback, which is positive. It's not as fast as all of us would like. It would be better if it was an API and you get the response, but at least within a couple of weeks, they're then able to apply fines at FCC level to be able to shut these organisations down or discourage them significantly from doing it again. I think in addition to that is the MEF working groups around fraud, and there are a number of proof of concepts, and we can talk later about that. But yeah, that again, trying to get some standardisation there and solutions to help the whole industry.
Thank you for the MEF plug there, Jason. Hassan, we're talking here mainly within context of SMS, but obviously a lot of today has been talking about RCS, and we've touched on Viber, WhatsApp, and other channels. So can you give us your perspective on what we should watch out for beyond SMS, perhaps with those channels as well?
Definitely. So I think we've seen this kind of behavior with the voice channel for a long time too. So there are concepts of vishing, which is the voice phishing. There is a concept called Voingir. It's a Japanese word, I think. It stands for call once and then hang up. And this is one kind of a behavior where people actually call a customer and cancel the call after one ring in a hope that the user will call back to that premium number that they own. So that is another example. If we look at WhatsApp, it is a bit more regulated because businesses do need to go through the Meta process in order to set up their WhatsApp accounts. But we've seen fraud cases even with WhatsApp in LATAM, for example. We've seen where the chatbot with which the WhatsApp is integrated has been hijacked, and then it has led to the initiation of a similar attack as seen with the SMS AID attacks. I've heard that with the RCS, since there is the verification, it will hopefully be, it will bring more stability, but we haven't really seen any incidents in terms of the RCS channel.
Okay. Anybody else on that topic? If not, I mean, I'd mentioned earlier about it seems to be some fraud cropping up in the P2P channel within RCS, yes, where I think what you have is people pretending to be the brand, because you can set that up in the P2P version on RCS, which is a bit concerning. So again, what we need to do is look at how we're going to try and catch that, and be interested to see how that flows through. I think an old friend of mine who was head of security at a technology firm once said, if somebody's going to hack you, they will probably hack you. But I think it's being vigilant, being aware, being conscious of these things. And I think, to Jason's point, MEF and other organisations, we host various forums just to try and understand this and share information across the group and across different regions. So. Okay, are there any questions from the audience? Or has the lunch well and truly kicked in there?
You have one up there.
We have one. It's David. I don't know if we can get a mic up to David at the top. Sorry, Martika, you're working the lunch off.
Just, I want to talk about my favourite subject again, so talk about a bit more about RCS. Obviously, you alluded to, we've seen some P2P, smishing attempts, potential fraud. Do you think the difference between the way that P2P messages appear from a telephone number, without a picture, without a name, versus a legitimate A2P RCS message which arrives with the picture, with the name, with the tick, with a slogan, does that make it easier to educate end users on what a genuine message looks like? Do you think that's enough?
If that's a question for me, I'll try and start with that, and then I'll hand it over to the experts. I do think there's an education thing there, and I go back to one of the global banks that I sat in a room with, and again, head of, I think she was part of the security team, but senior role there, who was saying, if you can provide me a channel which guarantees it's locked down, so if I send that on this channel to my customer and they know it's from me, and that there's no way there can be any ambiguity, and if behind that it's as simple as that bank telling its customers, if it has the shield and the tick, there's absolutely no doubt that that's from us, then that's a huge value to it, was what she'd said in that meeting. And I kind of, that stays with me. So to answer your question, I think, you know, the having the imagery there, the pictures, it's very easy, I think, for us to understand. And I do it, you know, I browse on X and various other platforms on occasion, and sometimes I'll think, is that actually from that person? Is that from that footballer, or is that from Elon Musk? And the first thing I do, my eye goes to the shield and the blue tick, just to see if it's legit. So I do think that there's the education piece, and that can be done through that channel and other channels potentially. But I do think that with having that it's more than just the text. I think, from my perspective, it definitely helps. I think it's simple, it's easy, and it's visual, so people will get it.
I agree. I think the extra bit that RCS has, for me, is the alpha sender and reply path. That is absolutely critical. And, you know, we don't see as much fraud from that perspective because we've pretty much locked down on senders where alpha is supported in country. Whereas I think most of us have probably had some fraud, both ourselves and our friends and family have had fraud on a long number. And so everyone tends to generally, well, maybe not everyone, there's still some education there, but think about a long number potentially as more fraudulent. And so, I think some education will help for sure.
Yeah.
Nick, the challenge we've always seen here and continue to see, it does depend on the country, because there's still countries where alpha isn't locked down. But it would require every brand then to follow the same rules. Believe it or not, I still get legitimate A2P from long numbers, and often out of country long numbers, depending on what service they're using. But I know the messages are legitimate. And on the other hand, then in Ireland at least, we get alpha senders using exactly the correct alpha sender, so it's even grouped in the same thread on your phone. But this time it's a scam, particularly the post office ones. And then sometimes you've got this weird hybrid thing where one of the banks, at least that I deal with, I get if they want to send me a message to confirm a transaction, the first message comes from their alpha sender, and it tells you the number that the next message is going to come from, to tell you in advance to trust it. Now, I don't know how many people that might put off, but it's what if the first one wasn't legitimate? Like, where's the chain of security here?
I think, just to add to that, I think at least if we look at the Nordics market, so it is quite dependent on the use case. So if it is related to a financial institution, at least in Sweden and some of the other Nordic countries, all of the financial transactions, majority of the things that have to do with the tax authorities, even the healthcare system, those things are very well regulated, and for logging into those kind of services, and in order to do those things, we have the concept of a bank ID, and that basically, to a large extent, eliminates the need for banks to actually communicate through other channels, because you are sort of 100% sure that by logging in via the bank ID, you are actually reaching the right source, you are doing the transaction, so there is peace of mind. But I do think that some of the other cases where you might receive delivery receipts from the courier company, or you receive a confirmation of a booking, or you actually receive a link where you can go to a landing page and probably confirm some details, RCS will bring a lot of credibility to those messages, because we do see that behavior in Sweden, where you actually receive requests from people or receive calls from people, and it would be P2P, but it would be to log into your bank ID. So I think those messages, which are probably not as critical as being coming from a bank, we will see, I think, sort of get more credible.
Yeah, and it would be great to, from a MEF perspective, to gather all of these different use cases and publish them so that the wider community can see that. I mean, Europe alone, as we call it, is a patchwork quilt. It's just different from, from one region to the next, very much. We know that with language. We've run out of time. Thank you very much, guys. Really enjoyed that session. Thank you.
Thank you.